To make placement quicker, I put them in the I-bomb order, which is the order I was going to fit them. Then it's grab the top one, read the value on the packaging, place the part, and move the remainder off the board. I figured it would be quicker to tip all the parts out of the value I'm fitting into a container, but in the end it was quicker to just tip them out on the desk. The larger, flatter surface made it easier to tip the parts over when they were upside down. I had some red LEDs to match the I-bomb, so it's now red and blue. I took the parts out of their plastic bag and peeled a bit of tape, and that way I could get the stuff out fast. Next was a squash test to figure out how much glue I needed. SMD parts have to have an air gap under the body to make sure the pins are the lowest point, so you kind of have to test with an actual part. Basically, you'll find out you need less than you think. I don't know if it's recommended, but the parts that get glued down, I'm going to do first. I'm guessing this will give more time for the glue to harden. So that'll be these ICs, this FT, these diodes, the double shotkeys, the SD card holder, maybe even the battery holder. This is my first time with a real stencil, so there's probably better instructions around. For me this was a one-shot deal because I didn't have any spares to practice on and I didn't want to wash all this off and start again to get good at it. So I'm going to use this unless I see a catastrophic mistake. I sped this video up so as not to be boring, but I took my time and spread it around quite slowly, and it took about 4 minutes for the sequence. Even though I was just hacking at it till I could see all the holes were filled, it's not that critical, and a first time attempt should be good enough to make it work. I actually made a mistake and missed a couple holes in the corner, but thankfully because of the hinge stencil I was able to put it back and just fill them up. This is where I had the idea to put the glued down parts first, so there's more time for the glue to cure. But if you think about it, on a production line the PCBs go through so fast the glue is probably still wet. So the glue is probably designed that way and you probably shouldn't worry about it. I fitted the 3 MCP 6004 op amps. The problem with glued down parts is they don't self-align, so you have to be very accurate in the placement. It's delicate work and you can't rest your hand on the PCB in case you've touched the paste, so I use this two-handed method. The FTDI chip. You have to push the part down lightly so the glue squashes and the legs make good contact with the paste, and the SD card holder. The double shotkeys is where it started getting difficult. Basically you've got very little room to put the glue between the 3 pads, so you have to be super accurate with glue placement. Then the glue strings, and you don't want one of those strings to fall on the paste because that'll stop the leg touching the paste. And you don't want to put too much glue down that when you press the part down it pushes the paste out of the way. I'm probably being overly pedantic and making it sound harder than it is, but better safe than sorry. Fit the double shotkeys or the BAS 70s. I should have really run a soldering test with these things hanging upside down to see if there was enough surface tension to hold it in place, but I figured the pads were so small that there wouldn't be enough solder to hold it upside down. Either way I didn't take the risk because I didn't want to do it twice, so I used the glue anyway. There's also one down here that I nearly missed. Now it's a matter of going through the I-bomb part groups one by one in order. Select the group, slide out sideways, find the part you want to fit, reference it to something nearby. In this case it's the bottom of the IC. Most are easy to reference. Like this one is the closest one to the bottom row of these through holes. This is the one on the left under the SD card holder. But when you get to these clusters it gets a bit harder. As an example we'll look at the second part. This one's not too bad. It's a 6th one along on the row under the double shotkeys. But over here you're going to have to zoom right in, and you might be able to work out what it's close to, like a hole on the end of this row of through holes. But sometimes you're going to have to read the number on the silk screen to be 100% sure. It seems like 50% of the placement time is looking up part positions. We grab the top one from our parts board. We check the value is correct. We tip the correct number of parts out on the table or a shallow dish. The remainder gets placed off the board, and the next part is now the new top. Then it's just flip the part if necessary, then just grab them and start placing. This is real time, and it took about 10 seconds for a first time part positioning. It should get quicker with more practice. There's no prizes for positional accuracy here because the solder will pull the part in position, so just position it roughly right and press it down so the paste has good contact with the ends of the part. Basically you want the flux in good contact with the end cap of the part because it's the flux that cleans the metal parts that makes the solder stick to it so well. Then it's just a matter of ticking off the parts you've just fitted, then grabbing the new top part and repeating. I was going to film all the part placement, but the battery in the camera only lasts 10 minutes and I couldn't charge batteries fast enough. Either way, all the simple passives were the same, except for their position. There are about 180 parts, so if you can find its location and place it every 30 seconds, it'll take about an hour and a half. I placed the trim pot without glue, in case I jammed it. I tried some of that cheap silicone thermal glue on the battery holder as a test to see if I could use it for a cheap SMD glue. After we fitted all our parts, we go to the I-bomb and see if everything's been ticked off, just in case we've missed something. We check the board that there's no parts still left on it, and that all the fitted parts have been moved off the board. Then it's in the oven. I'm only using the bottom heating element. 150 degrees C is roughly when the paste started turning to solder. It was a bit hard to see on the far side, but by 160 degrees Celsius it looked like it was all soldered. I left it till it hit 170 degrees Celsius because that was the temp in my tests that I'm sure the paste became solder. It took about 15 minutes from dead cold to solder. Then I gently cracked open the door and let it cool down till the solder was solid before I moved anything. Now for a visual inspection. I can't say the soldering looks as pretty as hand soldering, but it is a lot faster. The first fault I can see is there's bridges on the FTDI chip. Maybe the stencil wasn't flat and the paste was a bit thicker than normal. Either way, a quick solder wick will fix it. If you actually look at the pin feet, you see solder took to all of them, so you could say it worked fine. The only other fault I can see is one of the op amps has misaligned pins. That's the problem with glued down parts. They don't self-center, so you have to accurately position them at the start. I'm wondering now if it's better not to glue down the parts, then oven solder to align the part, and then just put a couple dobs of glue on the outside from the body to the PCB. It's certainly possible here because there's not that many parts. The SD card holder looks good. The solder took to all the pins of the double shotkeys, so they look fine to me. The big diodes look fine. The LEDs, more diodes. More LEDs, resistors, the trim pot. I visually checked every soldered joint and they all look like they've all taken, so it looks like the soldering has worked fine. When I wash the flux off, it's probably going to look better in the light of day, but for me this looks good enough. It basically comes down to fixing a couple bridges on the FTDI chip, and then this side should be finished. Just a side note on the cheap thermal glue, I figured $12 to $20 for the red glue is a bit expensive, and everyone has that cheap glue hanging around, so I was wondering if it would work. And it kind of works if cured before going in the oven, or if wet, in a very thin amount. Tiny amounts seem fine, but big blobs seem to expand like a balloon. It holds pretty well after an oven heat. This was zero clearance, unlike the gap under an SMD part, so it squashed out a lot. Either way, if you want to use it, maybe experiment on it first.